So we are looking at Psalms, and like I said, I'm pretty excited about this because we launched with the movie, and it was great. We had a great movie week last week, and the difficulty in our society of expressing pain and expressing sadness and having just being generally open about our feelings and about where we're at is actually kind of difficult. We have an entire websites and web culture that is purely about, if I could be frank, purely about us sharing how great our life is. We like to tell good stories. We like to edit our photos so that we look better and have the right shading and lighting. And we like to post the funny stories about our kids, but not the ones about them screaming and crying on the floor and demanding a treat when you're telling them to eat their dinner. We like to do all of those things. And to some degree, it's an expression of almost telling ourselves this is who we are, or trying to convince ourselves this is who we are. And we attempt as best we can to remove the negativity, to remove the sadness, to remove the hard times, to remove the struggle from our lives. And it creates a space where we have a hard time coping when there are hard times. Because we tell ourselves, well, God is good. Well, it's going to get better. Well, we have all kinds of coping mechanisms to get us out of that hard space. More than just getting us out of the hard space. We have coping mechanisms to try to trick ourselves to think that we're not in a hard space. So I have to apologize for this because I'm a little bit got you ramped up to experience sorrow and pain and all of this. And the Psalms don't do that all the time, right? And this series is about experiencing the breadth of the faith experience in the Psalms. And that starts sometimes in a different place. So I'm going to kind of pull the rug out from under you this morning and actually begin with a psalm that doesn't do any of that. So while it's important to remember that we are going to cycle through, this is what we're going to do. We're going to cycle through. I told you I'm working through Walter Brueggemann's The Message of the Psalms as we go through this. I encourage you to do it with me. He is a scholar. It is a little bit technical at times, but he is fascinating and brilliant. This book is 30 years old, and if you write a book on the Psalms today, you have to deal with Walter Brueggemann, who wrote 30 plus years ago. It's still that significant. On top of that, I'm reading stuff that's fresh and awesome and cool, and some of it is regurgitating what Brueggemann did 30 years ago. Like, wait a second, that's not very fresh. But anyway, the point being, here's Brueggemann's framework. I'm just going to lay this out for you so you know where we're going and where we're going to be throughout the series. Brueggemann uses this term orientation to talk about where you are in your faith journey at a current moment. And in the Psalms, he categorizes the Psalms in three different spaces. He says the first one is orientation. This is the statement that everything is good. The world around me makes sense to how I understand who God is. I can look to the history of my life. I can look to the place of being, and I can understand God's greatness and God's love and God's joy and how God is good, and all of that makes sense. The second set of psalms that he uses is called disorientation. As the name suggests, this is that moment when you wrestle with a new text and it doesn't fit with your framework of who God is. Or you have a new experience and it doesn't fit with who you understand to be God. Or it doesn't match, your worldview no longer matches what you've been told by your pastor or your parents or your church or whatever that is. And then the final stage that we find in the Psalms is a new orientation or reorientation. And this is that moment when you've been in that dark place of disorientation, and God, and all of a sudden you see in the midst of all of this struggle or pain or whatever it is, you see that God is still there. Maybe you have a new perspective on a passage that didn't make sense. Maybe through the darkness you see God working in ways that you didn't see before. This is the faith cycle, and at some point that new orientation becomes the status quo of orientation again. And so this is a cycle that we see over and over. To help us experience that, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to do that cycle twice. So we're going to feel today the highs, the positives, the status quo, and everything like that. And then next week, we're going to move into disorientation and then new orientation, and we're going to follow that cycle for a couple of times to experience it. What that means today is, as we read Psalm 145 together, some of you are not there, right? And next week, when we read a psalm of pain and anger, some of you aren't there either. And so you're going to be uncomfortable in that space, and that's good. It's okay. That's part of sharing faith journey with those around us, with our community. So this state of orientation is the childlike faith that Jesus talks about. It's that story as you're growing up. If you grew up in the church, I grew up in the church. I know a lot of you didn't. That's okay. But if you grew up in the church, this is you learning from day one. I grew up, I was at church the next week, and from day one, my worldview and my framework of who God was all tied together. And for many, many years, that was fine. That was okay. It was good. I was able to look around in the world. I was able to simply look at my faith. I was able to look at who God is and say, all of this makes sense. Yes, God is good. Yes, God created the world. Yes, I see God working every day in the little things, in the big things, in the small moments, in the important moments. Everywhere, everything matches. What that means is some of you are not in that space, right? Because that was a moment in time. And we come back to that. This is kind of the status quo. And this is when somebody says, you're having a hard time, and somebody says, you should read the Psalms. This is what they're talking about. Go read these nice, loving Psalms that tell about God's creation, that tell about all the good things. And the attempt or the statement is, if you read the positive things, you can get out of this dark moment. Some of you hear somebody say, you should read the Psalms. And you go do that, and you open it up to an angry passage, and you go, oh yeah, that's what I was looking for. Because now you're experiencing with someone who has gone through that moment in faith with you. But if you opened up to Psalm 145 in a difficult moment, you might not get much out of it. It might be really difficult for you to read that and say, oh yeah, I'm better now. All that stuff. That was just me or something like that. And this is bigger than that. It's part of a cycle, and the cycle is good. If you've been around faithful for a long time, you recognize your own cycles. You see the moments of doubt. You see the moments of struggle. You see the moments when you come out of that and you're able to find a new perspective that makes sense, that works, that aligns with who God is. And in this moment, you're able to reconstruct that sort of status quo of what faith is. How do I do this nicely? Most churches expect for you to show up on Sunday morning with the status quo. We're not a lot different, to be honest. We want to support you when you're struggling. We want to be a place of healing when things are hard. But it is very difficult for us to say, we want you to show up in whatever space you're in. Most churches want you to show up in the status quo. That is with a smile on your face. That is claiming God is good. That is singing the praise songs where we can jump and clap and dance and really experience God's presence. And that is this moment of Psalm 145. This is known as we kind of Brueggemann, others have termed it a creation psalm. And in the midst of identifying creation, we could do this with Genesis 1 too. We did it a little bit this week actually in the Bible study. When you identify God as creator, you identify God as the order amidst the chaos of life. So yesterday, we had a birthday party for our kids. And we had 45 kids here in this room with pool noodle lightsabers popping bubbles and slashing one another's faces and punching balloons and everything else you can imagine. It is chaos, right? And I don't know a better word for that. It's just chaotic, just chaos. And in the midst of chaos, so that's funny, but in the midst of real chaos, when you begin to break down, when life begins to break down, we turn to these creation psalms and we can say, or Genesis 1, and we can look at the world and we can go, okay, everything I see is created by God. Everything that is orderly in our life is created by God and is part of who God is, and tells me that even if this is total chaos, it tells me that God is good. And that in the midst of this chaos, there is order in the world created by a loving God. That's what these do. Let's read some. This is Psalm 145. It's one of many similar. We lose a little bit in the translation. This is, I'll come back to that. I lift you high in praise, my God, O my King, and I'll bless your name into eternity. I'll bless you every day and keep it up from now to eternity. God is magnificent. He can never be praised enough. There are no boundaries to his greatness. Generation after generation stands in awe of your work. Each one tells stories of your mighty acts. Your beauty and splendor have everyone talking. I compose songs on your wonders. Your marvelous doings are headline news. I could write a book full of the details of your greatness. The fame of your goodness spreads across the country. Your righteousness is on everyone's lips. When you are in a happy place, you sing that psalm. You identify with the statement, I will bless you every day. There are no boundaries to your greatness. When you're in a dark place, in a different point, and you read that psalm, you might question, you might wonder, you might have struggle with the words that are in use here. And that's part of the faith cycle. That's part of being faithful to God and being there in the hard times, in the chaotic times, and in the good times. But this is the moment when we lift God up and we say, everything we see around is good. So the next few, what we miss in this is that each line here begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and all the way down. So that obviously doesn't translate to the English, right? But what is fun about that is that it is just one more way to say that it's not just that God is good and God is great. It is the completeness of everything we see is under order. And so to run through the entire alphabet this way, it is to say from beginning to end, God is good. Let's keep reading a bit and just kind of soak in the psalm and let it wash over you. God is all mercy and grace, not quick to anger, is rich in love. God is good to one and all. Everything he does is suffused with grace. Creation and creatures applaud you, God. Your holy people bless you. They talk about the glories of your rule. They exclaim over your splendor, letting the world know of your power for good, the lavish splendor of your kingdom. The kingdom is a kingdom eternal. You never get voted out of office. God always does what he says and is gracious in everything he does. God gives a hand to those down on their luck, gives a fresh start to those ready to quit. All eyes are on you, expectant. You give them their meals on time. Generous to a fault, you lavish your favor on all creatures. Everything God does is right. The trademark on all his works is love. God is there, listening for all who pray and mean it. He does what's best for those who fear him, hears them call out and saves them. God sticks by all who love him. But it's all over for those who don't. My mouth is filled with God's praise. Let everything living bless him. Bless his holy name from now to eternity. We write songs that sound like that. From this group of orientation psalms, we sing the really, we put them to music again, we should say. We put them to music again and sing them in new ways because we lift that moment up as excited and as joyful. And in that same moment of the birthday party full of chaos is the birthday party full of celebration, right? In that same moment, we look into a chaotic world, but we're able to see and experience God in all completeness and all of the created order falling into place. And so when we do that with Genesis 1, we can read through and we can experience all of created order falling into place to give claim to God as a great and wonderful God. There's a dark side to this moment of orientation, though. And I don't want to hit it too hard, but you should know. The struggle with the Psalms of orientation is that they promote the status quo. And by that, I mean that you can quickly turn a psalm of orientation into a psalm of power and control. And this is where we see the movement and the flow and the reason we have to follow with disorientation. You see, when a statement about God gets abused, when a psalm is abused, we turn to this moment where we say, everything is good. If you're in a place of wealth, if you're in a place of an easy life, if you're in a place that is in sort of the powerful elite. We could talk about Israel. We could talk about now. We could talk about middle class. We could talk about poverty. We could talk about all of these moments where life is easier for some and harder for others. If you're in a place where life is easy, easier, you can sing this psalm and own it and miss the fact that others are not here, that others are fighting poverty, that others are fighting rejection from their church or from their family, and that others are in a place that cannot claim this. So there's a tendency to claim this psalm and say, no, it looks hard, but you've got it wrong because God is good, God is orderly. And what was that line? You lavish your favor on all creatures. God's there listening for all who pray. God gives a hand to those down on their luck, gives a fresh start to those ready to quit. You see, in those moments when we are excited about who God is and everything makes sense in our world, we are quick to tell somebody else that suffering is a misunderstanding of who God is. That suffering misses that God is good and orderly and everything works. So let's put that into a society, into a power dynamic. So if you are in a place of, if we're in Israel and you have literally power struggles between classes and between elites and non-elites, the one who gets to describe who God is the one with the power. And when you have the power, you get to tell those who don't have it who God is. And so you're able to say to the lower class, whether it's through systemic oppression or whether it's through some sort of natural process or whether it is intentional oppression of a different class of people, you're able to say, listen, stay under control. Because this is who God is. God is orderly. God cares for you. God takes care of the sick and those in need. And you don't need to struggle. You don't need to fight back against the power struggle because God is all of these things. And so it's used as a control mechanism. And that place of orientation, the status quo for some, is the dark side of the moon for others. We watched a movie last night about the Catholic Church and the priests and the dark side of abuse and everything that was covered up. And you see in this moment, you see kids from lower class families specifically, you see kids that were outcast taken advantage of. And then their families that are so caught into the world of who God is are able to sit there and speak to their priests and to their bishops and to the hierarchy of the church and say, look, we don't want to hurt the church. We don't want to mess up the status quo. And they swept thousands of cases of abuse underneath the rug because the status quo is a psalm of orientation that can be abused and misused. So we have to recognize that in our moment of joy, there is also someone sitting next to us or a family member or someone in our community that is on the other side of things, experiencing that status quo as a statement of rejection, experiencing it as a statement of control. There's another set of Psalms. We can look at Psalms 1. That's not what I wanted to do. That still works, but that's not the one I was looking for. One second here. It's coming. Where'd it go? Psalm 119. Psalms 1 does this too. It's just not as good. I shouldn't say that, should I? Whatever. You're blessed when you stay on course, walking steadily on the road revealed by God. You're blessed when you follow his directions, doing your best to find him. That's right. You don't go off on your own. You walk straight along the road he set. You, God, prescribed the right way to live. Now you expect us to live it. Oh, that my steps might be steady, keeping to the course you set. Then I'd never have any regrets in comparing my life with your counsel. I thank you for speaking straight from your heart. I learned the pattern of your righteous ways. I'm going to do what you tell me to do. Don't ever walk off and leave me. You can hear in that moment And we do this. We do it as churches. We do it as parents teaching our young. We do this in a way that says, if you follow correctly, everything will be good. But we do it even when we know and have experience that that's not always true. And there are moments in our life when we can hear those words, we can say those words, we can speak those words and know that we are following, we are listening, we are on course with what God has asked us to do and be. And this is a moment of celebration in Psalms 119. Other Psalms of orientation literally walk us through step by step through the history of God's work in the world. And this is what we're doing on Thursday nights, walking through the steps of God's work in the world. And they remind us of all of the great moments. Just like our Facebook news feed, all of the great moments of history, right, are right there to follow and to identify and say, yes, God has been good. The 10 Commandments kind of get a hard knock. But if you're a Jew, the 10 Commandments, if you're Jewish, the 10 Commandments actually begins with the statement that God brought them out of the land of Egypt. They don't start with a commandment about something you should do. The commandment is, know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. That is a statement about the order and the beauty and the goodness and the greatness and everything that we know to be God. And sometimes we have the words and the experiences to match that, and sometimes we don't. So today we're lifting those Psalms up. But there's a critique in there, in the Psalms. There's a critique of what's on the other side. What's the oppression related to this story? And can we avoid? And I think this is a real question. Take this with you this week. Is it possible to live in a state of status quo and not turn that into something abusive or something oppressive for someone else? And I think it's a legitimate question to ask. Is it possible for us to live in this space of orientation without causing harm somewhere else? Today we remember that God is good and God is great. Next week we're going to go dark. Just come. And some of you are going to be uncomfortable with that. And some of you are literally uncomfortable with talking about how great everything is today. That's what's awesome about this.